Don't kid yourself. And the Chinese people know that they're being given a pile by that government. They know that. And the government is afraid, and they are afraid of their own people. Look at what they're doing to the Falun Gong. It would be like a government of India trying to arrest every yogi in India. In China, no, everybody in China goes like this. Very healthy, actually. I should do it myself. They go out and arrest all the people in China who do that every morning. If they say, I'm doing Falun Gong, oh, arrest them and sell their organs in Thailand. Come on. Nobel Peace Prize for Mr. Hu, for President Hu. Or what I have to say is, if President Hu doesn't want the Nobel Peace Prize, we'll give it to President whoever. I know, it's really corny. I'm getting sick of it myself. But it is good. I do like it. I think President Hu wants to do it, actually. There was an article by a Chinese journalist and professor at Beijing University that was reported 3 or 4 days ago. Jiang Guobiao, his name, or I think Jiang Guobiao. Actually a sitting professor, tenured professor, I guess they have tenure there, at Beijing University, and denouncing Jiang Zemin's propaganda department as a Nazi-like institution, telling a lot of lies that nobody really believes. I was amazed that he hasn't been hauled away, at least maybe he has, but it was 4 days ago, but I didn't hear that he'd been arrested. And he said he was encouraged by elders, party elders in the government to blow the whistle on this stupid propaganda trip that they tried to do. And that must mean that somebody wants to break away from this like dead-end policy and wants to go with the Olympic idea of being lovable. You know, they want to be loved, the Chinese. They want us to admire them, and we do admire them. But we don't admire their Nazi-like tactics that they're doing in Tibet. And in Tibet, they have these like total cultural revolutionaries talking about wolves and jackals and things. It's just completely silly. And the poor Tibetan monks are feeling this on their bodies right this minute. But my point is, whatever a terrible thing is happening, there is a nation, there are people who are insisting on nonviolence anyway. Nonviolence unto death, that means. And that's what we need. We will demilitarize this planet when all of us say, I will risk my life not to do violence to anybody, but I won't risk it to do violence. When more people will risk their life to disobey any violence-bearing order than now will risk them in dealing violence, we will have world peace, and not until. Isn't that logical? And don't say that it's impossible. Don't let yourself think that it's impossible. Gandhi, it's not just some Indians do that because they're yogis or something. The Indians did it because there were a lot of them and because it was a practical thing to do. The Dalai Lama is doing it because it's practical. Nonviolence is, there's a guy named Gene Sharp who was at Harvard at an institute of political science research, and he wrote many books on the many instances where nonviolence actually worked. It's very powerful. Governments, when there's nonviolent protest movement against a dictatorial government, they go and send an agent provocateur to go and do violence as if they were part of the protesters so they can then beat them up, because they're really afraid of nonviolence, because it's more powerful. So they go and send people to pose as the protesters and then make them do violence and give them the excuse. So the Dalai Lama's people did not really do violence. They all over Tibet, tens of thousands of them stood up at the risk of life without doing violence. So well, maybe some shops burned, but very likely, we know from 1989, the last time there were some burned shops in Lhasa, it was Chinese soldiers posing as Tibetan monks. We have evidence on that. We have pictures and photographs. We don't have any evidence this time. There was one thing that was circulated, but it wasn't true evidence. So we can't say that with evidence-based belief, but that's what they do in the past, so we assume that's what they did. And probably some Tibetans themselves got carried away, which the Dalai Lama, like in Gandhi's movement, he would have big strikes, and some people would get freaked out, and they would fight with the police or burn the police station or something, and then he would call off that nonviolent thing whenever the discipline would break in any one place. He would call it off, like the Dalai Lama tried to do. But Dalai Lama did not start it. And in spite of it, Dalai Lama calls for nonviolence and dialogue. And my book, I got tired of people in the movement who support Tibet giving up inside. They say free Tibet, oh, we support the Tibetans, But in their mind, they think it's hopeless. They think it's all over. And hopelessness leads to two things, depression or violence. It's not at all hopeless. And then there's this sort of racist attitude of the sinologists, I'm sorry to say, who say, oh, Chinese are different. They can't lose face. You don't want to confront them. They're different. Like what? They're 10-year-old children having a tantrum? All of them? What about the American president or vice president? Do they have a problem with their face? Of course, they shoot the face of their friend, but that's the vice president. But no, they get just any egotistical person, west or east or north or south, they get egotistical and invested and they don't want to admit a mistake. How many male chauvinist fathers in a household won't admit a mistake to their child or their son and act idiotically? I've known one to do that in some argument with a son, and I'm not Chinese. So this is racist to say that Chinese are especially, they're different than the Russians. They're not going to walk out of Eastern Germany like the Russians. No, oh, they couldn't walk out of Tibet. Oh no, if it turned out to be impractical, they'll just go on like they're doing any impractical thing because they're Chinese. That's racist. It's totally hopeful. Chinese are brilliant people. They're fabulous with food, with culture, with art. They were great Buddhists for thousands of years. They had great yogis. They had Zen masters. They're the Taoist mystics. You know, they're really far out people. Confucius was a genius. He was not making fortune cookies. He was a brilliant, brilliant humanist. So we should not close our mind that this cannot all have a happy ending. But we have to insist, and we have to be articulate, and we have to speak up. And don't settle for these lame ideas. And then we have to also, like I have Chinese friends who say, or acquaintances, some who say, well, you give America back to the Indians and we'll give Tibet back to the Tibetans. It's very different. They just went in there 50 years ago. Tibet was a different society. We didn't go into there. We know our great-grandparents did, yes, and we're sorry, and you gave back Nunavut, we'll give the Black Hills, we'll pay them off, they can have Oklahoma back, you know. When all the mortgages collapse and everything, we'll give the place back to they can put teepees up. So anyway, I hope when my book comes out on June 3rd, I hope you like it. And it's a positive vision of what that world could be like. And that is important for the world. And actually the people who will really tell you that it'll never work, nonviolence can't work, a lot of people will tell you that. But everyone who tells you that is someone who is invested in some sort of violence. They think they can gain from violence. They think America will gain some more cheap oil from violence. They think somebody will get something out of violence. They're still secretly thinking they're going to get something out of it. And nobody is getting anything out of it. I recommend a wonderful book by Jonathan Schell called The Unconquerable World. It has nothing to do with Tibet or Buddhism or anything. It's based on Václav Havel and Lech Walesa and other Eastern European intellectuals who accomplished the bloodless revolution getting rid of the Russians, the Russian state in Eastern Europe. And it's called The Power, Nonviolence, and the Will of the People. But it doesn't refer to Gandhi. It bases its analysis in von Clausewitz, the theorist of war, and proves that war is obsolete. It absolutely cannot work, and it should be abandoned by all of us. And then think how much money we would have to spend on nice things, useful things. Okay? So that's what I have to say about it. So Toynbee's thing that we need to become civilized is what he's saying. Now you're in Canada and you are more civilized. Michael Moore is confident he could come up here and knock on any of your doors and you wouldn't shoot him. He's determined. Whereas he'd probably get blown away in Detroit or New York or somewhere, he thinks. Well, he knows better than that. Charlton Heston would have shot him, but nobody. So the point is, so I know I'm talking in Canada. I used to sort of dish this out more to Americans who are worse off, you know. But we're all the same in a way. We're all in this Western boat. And we have to also set an example for the last big dictatorship, which is the Chinese, to get them to relax and go the way of the Eastern European communist parties and become part of a multi-party system and thereby gain the affection of their people and run for election. Gain their affection by